This is IDEA NOSH, a podcast where we explore ideas that shape our world. Hey, I'm Summer Rayne, and before we get into this episode, I want to give a shout out to the folks over at Conscious Box. Now, they provide a monthly box of more health-conscious products. And in April is their month of cleanse, and I will be curating a sugar detox survival kit with them. I don't even want to call it a survival kit. I should call it a thrive kit because that's exactly what it is. If you've been following my journey over on sugardetox.me, then you'll know that I have some big beef with sugar and have been actively removing it out of my diet. So in the summer, I did a sugar detox journey and put up a website, and it was more like a journal, but wanted to take another sugar detox journey this winter, make it a little bit more seasonal, and just redid the website so that other people could actually do the 30-day detox themselves. But, you know, at the end of the day, I'll be doing this detox throughout February, throughout March, April as well. And just to the point where it actually gets to be more of my lifestyle, because you'll see, if you read any of the information, you'll see why I have such a big beef with sugar. And I know for some of you who struggle with a sweet tooth, you probably know what I'm talking about. But check out Conscious Box come April. It's going to have a lot of great goodies and information that I've been using to fuel my whole sugar detox journey. Now on to the episode. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with Martijn van Hildebrand. Now, you might not have heard of Martijn, but I am telling you, this man is the real deal. I mean, where do I even begin to describe him? Martijn is a stalwart for Indigenous rights. I think that's an excellent place to start. He works in the Colombian Amazon. And 40 years ago, he took a trip down the Amazon. And since that time has led the charge in protecting over 55% of the Amazon rainforest within Colombia, alongside his organization, Gaia Amazonas, and the indigenous peoples of the area. This, on top of 17% of protected conservation land, which, yes, he's had a role in, is an area larger than the United Kingdom. So this is not a man that shrinks from a good challenge. So we'll chat with Martijn about his early encounters with indigenous peoples, how his work has evolved over the years, and then we'll dive into the ritual, meditation, and the use of ayahuasca within ceremonies, something I think he has an interesting perspective on. So Martijn, this is the routine, as I had mentioned to you. We're going to start with a quote, and we're going to converse about what that has inspired out of you. So here it goes. All of us, whether or not we are warriors, have a cubic centimeter of chance that pops out in front of our eyes from time to time. The difference between an average man and a warrior is that the warrior is aware of this, and one of his tasks is to be alert, deliberating, waiting, so that when his cubic centimeter pops out, he has the necessary speed, the prowess, to pick it up. And that's by Carlos Castaneda. Mm-hmm. So my question to you is, when was your cubic centimeter of chance?
It's difficult in the sense that sometimes you're aware and sometimes you're not aware. And many times you're not aware. And you just have it, you have an intuition. It's in you. And sometimes without even realizing, you go for it. And you go for what we could call the right thing. You go for this opportunity. Many times when people ask me about this kind of a question, I have the impression that life has taught me more than me thinking life. Life has taken me along. Of course, there have been moments which I've been fortunate. For instance, I lived with indigenous people in the 70s and already had a vision, or had this, yes, we can call it a vision, that we were going to go for the land rights. We wouldn't go, or I wouldn't push for 1 million hectares. I'd push for 20 million hectares. Go for the lot if you're going to do the job. Go for all. Also for these people, my whole dream from the beginning, or my whole intuition from the beginning, is that these people had a right not only to be themselves, but to be a culture and a society as we are. And there was no reason why one society should deny another or control another. So my initial feeling and my drive was hold back the outside world, hold back the encroachment. So more than working for or pushing initially, and even to this day I would say so, more than pushing for indigenous people's rights is a question that we don't have a right to encroach on them. We don't have a right to impose on them. They have a right to be themselves and to continue being themselves and open a space where they have the time and the possibility to, when I say the time and the possibility, to decide how they want to relate to us. Now, it's not just holding back. It means that, therefore, for us to hold back, you have to recognize that they own the land. You have to recognize that they have a right to speak their language, that they can set up their own schools, that they can set up their own health processes, that they can set up their own government. You have to have laws and that protect them or that stop us from going in there and encroaching, and they have to have land where they can say, excuse me, but this is our land, and you're welcome whenever we decide that we would like you to come. So more than rights of the indigenous peoples, that we don't have the right to walk over them or to impose our agenda. Now, coming back to the quotation, I lived with them and then I had a chance to get into government, and suddenly the possibility opened and I knew which way I was going. Not only did I know, but I had a very short agenda: land, laws, local governments. That was basically my agenda. I was not worried about the economic angle. Will they have money, not money? That wasn't the problem. That might come or not come. That wasn't the problem. And they all live from the old traditional economy, so it's not a question of money. But it is that, be prepared. There will be a door that's open at a certain moment in life. So always be prepared and know where you want to go, and respond to your guts, respond to your feelings more than to your mind. Your mind is there to help you organize things, but your guts are the ones that drive you. The guts are the ones that show you, that inspire you, that show you which way you want to go. And be prepared in that sense. Listen to your guts and be alert, yes, and when the doors open, then you can move, and you can move in that direction. And I would agree in that sense with Castañeda. It is, and that's why I say life has taught me, because I think I follow more my guts than my thinking. My thinking obeyed to my guts, but it's sort of rationalized and helped me to get where I want to go. But really the drive came from inside.
And then going back to 1972, that's when you took a canoe, or you canoed down through the Amazon. Was it your gut that told you that you needed to go to the Amazon, or what drove you there in the first place? Excitement.
I think what drove me there was adventure. Yes, I was interested in other cultures since I was a kid. I remember when I was 12 years old, my grandfather gave me a big book on Greek mythology, and I became an expert on Greek mythology. I just loved it. And of course, indigenous people there's a lot of mythologies, a lot of stories out there. And as I went by canoe, and I went for about 4 months rowing through these places where some of the young people spoke Spanish, but none of the elders, and very few people did speak Spanish. There were many languages. There were at least 12 languages on the rivers I rode down. When they asked me, what did you come for, I always said, why are you here? Because no white people went there. It was very strange for somebody to go there, unless now and again a priest might go there to convert them or whatever it was, or try to civilize them or whatever it was. But very few actually went. They asked me why I came, and I said to listen to stories. I came to listen to your stories, and that's how my relation started. And they would tell me stories, and after telling me stories 2 or 3 or 4 nights, that would go on all night, they would say, now you tell us a story. And I would come up with my Greek mythology and tell them a story. And that's how we built our relationship, to understand, at least to come close, because you never really understand, but at least to come close to understanding their, whatever it is, their worldview, their social structure, their rituals, even shamanism. It went through stories.
Were you studying at that time to be an anthropologist, or what was happening at that time when you were down there?
I wasn't studying. I was obviously learning because I was with the Indians. I had already studied at University College Dublin in Ireland. Mm-hmm. I had studied sociology and archaeology. I had a BA. And then I had taught for 2 years sociology at the University of Piura in Peru. When I came back, I wanted to go to the Indians. I was very interested in anthropology. I knew Gerardo Reichel Dolmatov, who had been my teacher at the beginning in Colombia before I went to Ireland, just for 6 months. But I was interested. So I was interested in indigenous people. I was interested in the Amazon. It was the adventure, rowing in, I was about 28. And so it was that adventure also. Again, as I say, sometimes the gut feeling drives you and you're not fully aware. It just takes you, it's stronger than you. It's just, you move along and it is guiding you more than you responding to it.
Looking back in, the 1970s when you were going down there, do you feel like you approached it with a very open mind, or were you kind of coming in with certain presumptions?
I came with presumptions. I remember when I arrived in the small town of Mitu, and I met the Monsignor, the head of the church there, and we had a chat. And I spoke about the rights, and again, and I don't like that word that much, but anyway, the rights of the indigenous people to be themselves, and the need we had to respect them, and the right that all people have in the world, not only indigenous people, everybody has a right to be themselves, and to continue being themselves, and to make their choices. And therefore I said that I thought that we had to respect indigenous cultures. And the head of the church there, Monsignor Bellarmino Correa, said, Martin, you're going, the Indians are going to be assimilated into the Western culture. You are simply going against history. And I said, I can't go against history because history is not written. We make history. And now 40 years later, Monsignor sits in a little town, very old. The church is not really operating there, certainly not with the Indians in the same way. They are not out there civilizing them or Christianizing them in the same way. They don't have agreements with the government. They can go out individually and teach their religion. Nobody's going to stop them. It's the indigenous people that have their governments and have their land. So history did go the other way and not his way. So I don't know who was going against history, as it turned out to be. So in that sense, I had preconceived idea. Yes, I believe that these people have a right to be themselves. And that was my preconception, if you wish. And in that sense, I had an open mind. I would call it an open mind. But if you ask the priests, they would say a preconception that I thought that they had a right to be themselves, where they should really be good Christians or Catholics. So it depends which way you look at it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that when you met, and again, to put this into context for some of the listeners, when you actually met some of these indigenous people, they were, for more or less, enslaved by the current people in power. Is that true?
Yes, when I came down the river, and of course I met a lot of indigenous people that couldn't speak Spanish, that were still living in in their tradition. Nowadays, they still live in 80% of their tradition. When I use such a number as 80%, people might think I'm just using a term. No, it's not just a term like that. When we have done studies with them, or they've done studies, because that's another thing, jumping ahead in our conversation. After I did my doctorate in Paris in ethnology in 1980, that is, I lived in the 70s with the Indians, and in the 80s, I did my doctorate and I came back and went to the government. And then afterwards, I set up the foundation, Gaia Amazonas. My attitude from the beginning, or from that moment, was we will do no more research with indigenous people. The indigenous people will not be informants. They will not be objects that we study. They will be the subjects. They will do the research. They will do the studying. They will write it up.
But did you have that philosophy when you first came into?
I wasn't that clear, but it was in me. I think it was in my father. It's ironical that my father thought like that, and he set up perhaps one of the most important universities. He created one of the most important universities in Latin America, the University of the Andes in Colombia, and he really didn't believe that the universities were that important. He thought it was more important to go out in the world, to get to know the world, to speak languages, and the university was a certain amount of training, but that was not the objective. The objective was developing yourself in society, in countries, in languages, And so I heard that a lot. I mean, my father being precisely the general secretary of the university for 13 years, it was a topic that came up at the table, and so I think I had it in me without having thought too much about it. But we'll come back to your question. When I went in there, visiting the indigenous people, and why I went off on a branch about research and all that, is that I was saying 80%, and I meant that through the research they've done, let's say, they use 80% of the traditional, we look at all the health cases and all the problems of health, and we can say that 80% of healing is done by the traditional medicine and 20% by Western medicine. If we look at the food, we'll say 95% is done by traditional food and 5% Western. If we look at their housing and all that, 100% is traditional. So that's why I say that, and if we look at their languages also, 90% is in their language. So in that sense, I can give a percentage. It does make sense when I'm saying that they're living in there, and a high percentage in their culture. Anyway, I arrived there and they were working in rubber camps. And we can use the word slavery, not because they were beaten at that stage. They had been beaten, they had been killed, they had been tortured in the up until, I'll say, 1950s, 1960s, perhaps 1950s. From the beginning of the century, they had been very, and particularly at the beginning of the 20th century. But they were still objects. They had no freedom. They had to go where they were told. They had to work for these people, for the patron. They had no rights. And so fundamentally, when somebody is an object, cannot make decisions, has no rights, and is forced to work with people, even if they are not physically ill-treated, I would say they are slaves, because they simply have no freedom. And these people did not have freedom. And so in that sense, we can use that they were slaves. I came into the camp, I met them, I went into their camps, I worked with them. I followed their work. I didn't work with them, but I was up at 3 o'clock in the morning and going around with them. And it'd go on until about 8 or 9 o'clock at night. And well, they would laugh and they'd be in a good mood. I mean, they were not suffering, they were not complaining, but they talked about the situation. And the other problem they had is that while they were in the rubber camps, and when they were not in the rubber camps, because it was raining too much, they'd have to go and work in the patron's garden. They let them go home to grow their own gardens, to knock down the forest for the women to grow the gardens. But that was only because from that food, the patron then would take that food to feed the Indians, so they had to produce their own food by making gardens. But it was not that they had the freedom. It was simply because economically it suited the patron. And that kids, their children from the age of 6, were forced into schools, into what they are boarding schools, but they were called orfelinatos. In English, that would be orphanage.
Orphanages, yeah.
Orphanages. Because they were considered that they had no parents, because their parents were primitive, their parents were wrong. And in the school, what they learned was not to be an Indian, more than to be anything else. That is that their parents were wrong, their religion was wrong, their food was wrong, their habits were wrong, everything that they inherited and all their ancestors, they were all wrong.
And did these kids, and not to interject too much and then go back to your answer, but were these kids, did they grow up self-hating, self-loathing, or self-hating, or not loving themselves and not loving the indigenous people? Do you know?
Well, when we arrived there, yes. let's say they were ashamed to speak the language. They were ashamed really to be Indians, but they were, because obviously after school they were sent back to the community. Many of them ran away from school. But they, of course, had a grudge. They were wounded. And they were wounded to the point that when I went with them, and let's say we'd go on with they made a beer there, I would drink beer with them in kind of rituals, right? I was so surprised to be with them, and these elders, shamans, and people, very respectful. They'd break into tears. They'd just sit there and cry and cry and cry. And with the alcohol, it just brought out their suffering. So undoubtedly, they were hurt. And I would say that our greatest success, although we've got all this land recognized, and we've come a long way with their rights being recognized, I would say our greatest success is how they have recuperated their dignity and their pride to be themselves, to sit at the table, speak the language, talk about the cosmology with the government, come here to New York and talk about that, and really that they have self-confidence. No, I think that is the greatest achievement over these 40 years.
And you actually saw that as well, because here in New York, we had one of the members of the Tanimuka indigenous groups here, Maximiliano, who won the Equator Prize. And he came in full garb, right? I mean, he came in with his headdress, his beads, his necklaces, his loincloth. And you saw people reacted to it. They were, and he was extremely confident through the whole time. Have you had a chance to talk to him about his experience?
Not since, no.
But you get a sense that he was...
You see, what's very important there, or perhaps the word important or outstanding, where we have had a chance to work along. I mean, it's been a long process. I mean, it's nothing. It's been 40 years. It's been 10% of the time that they have been denied. They've been denied for 400 years. It's been one generation. So it's very little compared to the suffering they've had in the past. So it's very little time, but from one's individual's point of view, it's 40 years. But what is important when I talk about the self-confidence, that they will sit at the table and negotiate with the government, come with their proposals and negotiate, but there isn't a grudge. They're not aggressive. They don't stand up from the table and say, well, you're not listening to me. They don't get angry with the government that plays tricks on them. They listen, they're quiet, they're strategists. They use silence, which is a very powerful weapon. You can have 30 men sitting there with one spokesman, and they make a proposal, and then you have somebody important from the government to come. And when I'm saying important, it could be a vice minister or somebody of a certain weight, head of a department, and they'll stand up and talk for 20 minutes. And after he finishes talking, there'll be dead silence. We Westerners cannot put up with silence. And they hear silence and they say, what's wrong? And he says, did you not understand? Silence. Nobody says anything. And it goes on for 1, 2, 3, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, and they don't know what to do. They get completely lost. They can't bear the silence. And after a few minutes, the spokesman will say, you forgot a word. What word, what word? Of course, he knew damn well what word he forgot, and these people were saying it. Let's say he forgot to say who's going to pay the bill, or where's the money coming from, but these wouldn't say a word. They wouldn't ask a question. They just keep silence until you bring up tremendous tension, and they say, you forgot a word, and go back into silence. And eventually the word comes out. No? So they've recuperated self-confidence. They can sit there and talk. They are not aggressive. It's where we have, and it's not to give credit to ourselves, but where we have where we have accompanied the processes, where we have not been there, we or nobody for that matter, where the process have not been accompanied, or whether it's been just the missionaries that have continued. Because it's not that I'm against in any way the church and religion, but these missionaries were very conservative and very imposing and very denying. They certainly were not inspired by love. They were inspired by power and domination and self-rightness. And they would always define the indigenous people as, it's the right word in English, minusvalid.
Invalid.
Invalid, okay.
Yeah.
Minusválido, I was thinking in Spanish. Invalid. These were invalid from a psychological or from a cultural point of view. And so they were always the poor little Indian. And that's the way they work. You see the other one as invalids, that he doesn't have a culture, or he doesn't have a knowledge, or he can't write, or he doesn't have economy. Which of course he has an economy, and of course he has an oral tradition, and of course he has a health institution, and of course all societies have it. But when you deny a society saying you don't have it, but then I'll be good, and I'll teach you, and I'll give you mine, and the process I dominate you, because as I give you mine, I control mine, and so you become dependent on what I have in medicine, or in health, or in religion, or in beliefs, or whatever it is, or economy. So that is a way of colonizing, or that is of controlling. And they're not fully aware of that. They simply go in there convinced that their culture is the best, and now I'm going to help the Indians by teaching them my culture and tell them their culture is wrong. No? So it's in these places that you get people that are deeply hurt, wounded, and aggressive. But when you work on the other side and say, no, we don't bring in answers, we'll listen to you. You propose the answer and we'll collaborate for you to help you think, or to help you come to find ways to how to deal with our society. When you ask us, we won't say anything if you don't ask us, but we do not go in with answers. We do not go in, it has to be their answer that they build. That makes all the difference over time. They regain self-confidence.
Well, let's pause there for a minute and start changing the subject. We talked about you and your work through the Amazon, that you've been working with a number of these indigenous groups over the last 40 years. How do you articulate to somebody like myself or somebody outside what your role is as an individual and through Gaia Amazonas?
I have to think a little bit in your question, because what my role is, and that I'm trying to get around that term. Because really what we have here is a commitment, a personal commitment. That's a commitment with myself. And beyond a commitment, it is simply a way of being, something that I've grown up with, and so it's in me. If I go way back, of course, in my family also, having an Irish mother from Southern Ireland, there was always a very deep feeling of being oneself and being independent because of the relationship with England. And my father and grandfather, who were very much against fascism in the war, and anti-Nazis, and also got themselves condemned and had to get out, were political refugees. So I guess in the family there was this very at least it touched me. We're 9 brothers and sisters. Not all of them went to the forest. Not all of them became for the underdog or for the indigenous people. I was the only one. I have another brother who's a biologist, and he's interested from a scientific point of view in the environment and the forest. But it touched me, I guess, the situation, and all this. And so it's in me. So again, the role that is, it's not a role, it's not that I'm doing something there, it's that I'm growing there, I'm living there. Now what do I do when I live there? What do I grow? What happens? From the beginning it started just by living and talking to them. Why do things happen in life? I don't know. For instance, I went there and I started going into the rubber camp and talking with them. And I suggested, for instance, I think you should, their headmen in the communities were receiving a salary from the local politician. And I said, you have to give up the salary, because he's paying you to be a captain, but you are not the headman of your community. You've become the foreman of your community. And therefore you're really working for the person that pays you and not for your people. And they accepted that. And for them to turn down this money or this income was to turn down accessing easily to certain things in even the Western world. I also suggested discussions. As I say, not bringing in answers, but talking. The importance of their culture and the importance of their lives and what that meant for them. And that instead of living and going and living close to the missionaries, they go back and set up their own villages or their own communal houses, because they're not villages, they're long houses in the forest again, as they used to do. We discussed this and they started doing it. And they started, and years later I said, Martin, how did you come up with these ideas? I mean, how did you suggest this? For me, it was perfectly natural. I mean, it was sort of, and so they listened to me. Not because it was me, but simply because I was coming up with ideas. I was somehow moving on their wavelengths. I was somehow moving on their spirit, somehow moving perhaps a bit on their pain and their suffering, but not bring it out as a grudge against society, not bring it out as a resentment, that they be resentful or that they be angry, but bring it out more, why don't we move in a certain direction and look at what you already have in you without rationalizing that much. It just came, it flowed as we spoke. Over quite a lot of time. I spent, as I say, at that time, in the 70s, I spent nearly 8 years with them. So it was flowing there with them. I would go in and out now and again, but I would always come back. I asked them once, years later, I asked a shaman, why do you think I always came back? A lot of anthropologists came and left and do their PhD and wouldn't come back once they had their PhD, and I came back. Why do you think I came back? And he said, in his language, it was translated to me, he said, because you like to drink our coffee. And, well, they don't have coffee to begin with, so it didn't make much sense. But I'm polite, I didn't say anything. But the translator, a young fellow, said, Martin, did you understand? And I said, well, I'm not sure. I don't think I understood really. And he said, the shaman is saying, your spirit feeds from this world. And I think it's that. So a role again. Do I have a role, or am I rolled? Or does life play with me? Does life take me along? Does life? And so, in another sense, the role there is to sit, to talk, to animate, to accompany, not to bring in answers, to stimulate their answers, to help them. And as we've evolved as a team after the 90s, when I set up the foundation, definitely we have people in there that accompany them to set up their own research processes, run by the shamans and the young people learning their culture. And then we support them with how they can work, even how they can write their language to begin with, and then how they can work on computers and put it on computers, make maps and all this, that because the young people become researchers, they were not willing to sit up all night listening to the elders. But when they became researchers and they learned how to write and could write, now to could tape and then to transcribe in their language, and then translate into Spanish, and then put it on maps, and put it on computers, and then publish it, or at least publish it in their communities, and show it and socialize it. Give them a specific role, which they were much prouder because it was between their culture and our culture. It sort of it allows them to use the techniques of our culture to dig into the past or the knowledge or traditional knowledge of their culture. For instance, in education, we were there and we discussed a lot with them. What was education? Where do they want to go? How do they want to live in the future? How do they imagine their future? What was the past? We'd start and we'd make maps, or they would make the maps of how they lived in the past, how they live in the present, and where would the changes come, and why were there changes, and what was the impact of these changes, and if they were looking to the future, how would they like to see the world? And they put these in maps, and it would be different because all maps are the way you relate to your environment, be it a social environment or a natural environment. And so maps done by women are different from maps done by men, maps done by young people are different from maps done by older people. And so rarely maps simply become a way of putting on paper your analysis or your understanding or your feelings. And sometimes in the maps you can put colors where it frightens you, be it the future or be your relationship with the environment or social, others where you feel more at ease. again, you can also put colors, how people feel with different aspects of how they relate to the environment.
And where did you learn how to use maps as a way of expressing past, present, future? Is that something that you've acquired knowledge along the way? Is this something that you picked up from the Indigenous people themselves and how they like to articulate themselves?
It wasn't. I think we developed it a lot with Indigenous people, and we developed also calendars, which is very important, which had not been developed before. And the two ways this developed, on the one hand, it was in the air. I mean, it was already there. A character called Fals Borda in Colombia had started doing maps on the coast with other people, historical maps. And then Álvaro Velasco had also started in the Cauca with these maps, and that helped. As far as the cycle of the years and the year cycle, and the different,
seasons or?
Las estaciones del año, winter, summer.
Seasons,
yeah. Yes, I skipped mine. The different seasons, which you can have at least 12 or 15 or 16 seasons in the Amazon, although one would think that there are no seasons. The seasons go by the behavior of the animals, and particularly the behavior of the plants and the fruits of the trees, and so they have different seasons for different fruits. And that's very important for them because the energy flows in different ways in each season. The energy of the life system, the sun, the fruit, the animals, there's a different behavior. And so the human beings also behave in a different way according to the hunting, to fishing, and food gathering, and growing, and gardening. So the seasons are very important. Working on these seasons, of course, is something one learns in anthropology, and so I had an idea of that, but and also maps. But then bring it that they set up the seasons, and bring it not only the seasons from an environmental point of view of the behavior of animals and plants, but how human beings respond to it in different rituals, and why these rituals appear, what are the myths of each ritual, and going deeper in the way they understand the seasons. And so the Indigenous people developed that a lot, and went much deeper than the general scheme that we had, which already existed, obviously. And there are many people that do social cartography, but I know very few that actually they look into space but not into time, and how the maps change. And even what I suggested, but then I didn't get that far, but what I would have liked to see is that when they made their different maps, they would do it with a stick in the sand and draw on the sand, and when they finished the map, they would erase the map. So each time you had to rebuild the map, because what I fear is that once you have a map, and it's nicely done on paper and colors, you put it on the wall, and then you explain the map to people. And when somebody explains something, you never create in the same way. And what is important is the creative process of making the map, and then forget about it. And the next person also has to make the map. And then you can then somebody else can do a map in a different way, and you can discuss maps. But having it already there and the explanation does not really make you think in the same way, because you're listening and you are to an extent imitating instead of creating. So, but then they wanted their maps on paper, and they wanted in colors, and they wanted in, and my idea would work now and again, but it was not taken on as a standard.
I think that's the difference as well with oral histories and stories that are passed down from generation to generation, and then actually writing something down and having it in print. And I know a mutual friend of ours, Wade Davis, had struggled with that a little bit, where he is sharing stories of a number of Indigenous people, and all of a sudden you write down a story and it becomes
the Bible.
And that's a great example.
Exactly.
Culture is very much a living, breathing entity. It's like,
absolutely.
We sometimes, as Westerners, we have this tendency to look at Indigenous people and feel like that's who they are. They want their traditions, and this is the way that they're supposed to be, and they should never dress in Western clothes. But as a matter of fact, we as individuals, and as all individuals and all human beings, we're all evolving in many different ways. And that map that you create today and that you wash away in the sand a few hours later might be a very different map tomorrow, or slightly different map tomorrow.
Or if it's the same, it doesn't matter, but you have to think through it. No? Now, of course, you're right when you also say myths are the same. You tell the myth, first the myth changes according to the season. You emphasize what you're interested in the myth. You emphasize what has been happening at home or in your longhouse. And if suddenly a problem comes up that somebody stole something, or somebody was jealous, or there was a fight, or there was something great happened, your myth would go into that and emphasize that, because that is what you're trying to explain the origins. And again, something that I find anyway, when people talk about the origins and the origins of a culture and the origins, we have a tendency to think in the past. We tend to think the origins are in the past. And the origins are not in the past. The origins are in the present, but they're deep inside us. When you really go into the origins, in a myth, or in a reason for things to be in a culture, you really should. It really, I think, is a question more of tapping in the shamans when they meditate. They're not thinking in time. They're going deep in themselves. They're going deep in their feelings. When they talk of the origins of the world, they're thinking of the origins that are in them and not in the past. And I think that in that sense, time doesn't exist. It's not a question that you look in the past and the future. When you see a sacred site and they say this is the origin of something, it's not the origin of 2,000 years or 5,000 or 10,000 years ago. It's not in the past. It's the origin here and now. This is where it emanates. This is where the essence of spirituality or of life is. And it's here and now. And so it is not so much as sometimes we think that time has been reduced or squashed or that they look at time and they reduce it to a moment. No, it's because it's in them. I sometimes compare it in ourselves, in our personal experience, that we can have a dream, and we can dream when we were children. And that dream can be very, very lively, and we go through the emotions and we go through the feelings that we're back in school, or we're back in as children, or we're with our parents. It's in us, it's alive. And time doesn't exist, it's there. And in that sense, when you go deep in yourself, you go back to the origins without going back in time. It's not a question of time.
Well, it's a very good transition into going into perhaps some more of these meditative states and going into a more inward reflection. I think that type of ritual and meditation is very important to many of the people that you work with, and you've probably experience that yourself. And I don't know whether, that's something that you had within yourself inherently already, or if it's something that was brought out by spending so much time within these cultures. But can you talk a little bit about that, these deeper meditative states? Perhaps we could talk a little bit about the experience that some of these cultures have with ayahuasca and similar plants. I know it's, as we had discussed, very fashionable for some people here, even in Brooklyn and New York, to want to do these things now. And I fear that some people might be missing the motivation behind it.
Well, to begin with, those people that might be taking it here in Brooklyn, New York, if it is very meaningful for them, well, that's good for them. Let's put it in those terms. If that's okay for them, fair enough. My approach is different, but it doesn't mean that their approach is wrong. Tribes I spent most time with, like the Tanimuka particularly, and also with the Letuama, and with the Yukuna, none of them take any ayahuasca or what we would call kafi or yahe. It's a different way, it's basically the same plant, different ways of preparing it. With the ayahuasca, they cook it, in the other case, they don't. They don't play around with it. And I'm talking about the tribes that I know that take it, like the Macuna or like the Barasano or other groups. I have never had the experience with the Ingano and with the Kofan, which are at the foot of the mountain. They are very much into ayahuasca, and I know that is where outside people, white people if you wish, outside people go and take ayahuasca. I've never been in those rituals, I've never gone to them, and so therefore I cannot say much about them. But the ones I do know, the way you become a shaman, there are two levels for this. One is to become a shaman, and you have to go deep in yourself. Generally at the age of, it doesn't really matter, it depends very much on the person, but let's say in adolescence, or let's say 14, 15, or something like that, when you're born, they've chosen you to be a shaman. You're brought up on certain diets and certain types of food to be a shaman, And you learn stories like the other kids, but in a little different way. Perhaps they go deeper in certain ways. But you already know that you are, they're training you from the very beginning, particularly on food. The food is the fundamental thing in their culture. And they say, look, no shamanism works without the diet. It's the food that makes the difference. And there's no point in healing somebody and you tell them you have to carry out this diet. And if they don't, there's no way it's going to work. The diet is fundamental for everything. Be it for women to have children, or be it to be a shaman, or be it to whatever it is. The diet is very important. What you can eat, what you cannot eat, and what you can eat according to the different seasons of the year. It changes all the time, and it changes from individual to individual, depending if the individual, if it's a woman, if she's menstruating, or if she has a child, or one thing or another. And men also, depending on their learning, depending if they're young, or if they're already a father, or if they're going through a ritual, the diets change. And for them, that's very important. And the meditation goes with the diet. And if you want to learn and become a shaman, let's say the Tanimukas, once you come to a certain age, you have to go into 5 years of meditation. And these 5 years, no sexual relationships, you sleep very little, you are very strict, you fast a lot, and you meditate. And they'll teach you once a year, really, in their rituals in the month of March, initiation, for 20 days, for 3 weeks, you don't eat anything practically at all. They keep your mind extremely alert, and they teach. And then the shaman, after that, doesn't ask questions really. He observes. Nature will teach him. He talks with nature. He watches the other shaman. He doesn't criticize, he learns. He can ask seldom, he can ask something, but it's rare. Basically, his observation of other shamans is getting his own ideas, and it is talking with nature. And each year, during these 5 years, he'll go a bit further in his learning, and he'll get also the paraphernalia and all the objects he needs to exercise his shamanism. And after 5 years, perhaps it's going a bit longer, depending, if he has sexual relationship, it interrupts. That's it stops there. He cannot go further. That is also very strict. The whole sexual thing is also very strict in this learning. And once he's learned, he has to prove himself. He has to be able to heal, he has to be able to do things. He has to show the community that he can do it. Now, many people learn shamanism at very different levels. They don't have to be a shaman to be able to heal. Many of them learn how to heal, let's say, the food for their children, to clean the food so when they eat the food, to take out the contamination in the food, because as all animals go through life, and an animal you're going to kill, or a fish, or you're going to eat, has gone through different situations in nature by eating plants, by eating different seasons. So he'll accumulate the energy of different seasons, which is not his essential energy. So you have to clean from that energy that's accumulated as he goes through eating different fruits from different seasons, and you only access to the energy through food of the clean fish. Because otherwise, what can cause illness, and what does cause illness, is the clash of energies that is a vital energy in the different plants and animals. When you're born, everything has to be clean. From the breast of your mother, the milk of your mother, to the hammock going to sleep in, everything has to be put through shamanism, and they take out the energy what accumulated there, and they prepare special energy for that child that will be good for that child. And in the same way, I think that you find the Orient in the East, if you eat too much of something, let's say a taper, and you eat a lot of taper without cleaning it, you become a taper inside. You look like a human being, but you're a taper. And you behave like a taper, and the animals and the jaguars and the snakes and everything will see you as a taper, not as a human being. And then you're in danger, because it is the clash of energies that creates illness. As long as things are in their place and they're clean, in that sense, basically health is order. And perhaps in English we have the word of dis-ease. And I'll give a very simple example. If you have a flower pot here and it's growing in earth, your plant grows nicely and it's growing nicely, and there's your flower pot. And I take a bit of this earth and I throw it on the ground, it's dirt. It's out of place. The same happens with our energies. Once they're out of place, keep things in place. Nature has already determined which is the place for each thing. And that is basically, you are a human being, you have your own energy, and you are part of nature, you flow with nature, but you are a human being. You're not a tapir, you're not a snake, you're not a crocodile, you're a human being. Each one has its essence. So the shaman has to keep the essence clean while he learns. Then he gets learning. And he has to withhold his energy. If he has sexual relationship, he disperses his energy. He has to hold all his energy and keep it clean and learn. And then he can take out it and he learns how to handle the energy. It's a technique. Shamanism is a technique. It has nothing to do with being good or being bad. Sometimes we say, in the Catholic Church, they say, to be a saint you have to achieve, is the right word perhaps, 2 or 3 miracles. And heal, suddenly the person can stand up that couldn't walk before. The shaman can do that, but it's not a miracle. He can be a bad guy. He can be an egoistic guy. He can be whatever, and he can do it because he handles energies. It has nothing to do with being good or bad. It has to do with a technique of handling energy. But this technique, you have to be clean in your energy. You have to be able to meditate. You have to withhold this energy, and then the moment you can move out of yourself and have an impact on other people's energies and clean other energies or move other energies. Energies of nature, not of the individual. When you heal a person, you're not concentrating on the person. The person is simply an indicator that something went wrong in nature and in society. That's why they're ill. There is a general imbalance. So they will take the energy of that person and hide it symbolically in the womb again of the mother. Bring it back to the womb, which they have a type of basket where they put it in. And then balance out the energy in society, put everybody back into diet, put the whole community back into diet, balance out the energies, take out all these negative energy and give it back to each animal, because you've accumulated, there's a general flow, and you cannot accumulate energy in the society or cut down or use nature, cut down a tree, certain types of trees, or use nature without asking the guardian spirits for permission. So if I went into your house and I took something, you'll get angry and you'll say, hey, you took something, so I'll go on and get it back. And when I get it back, I'm taking something out of your house. And what could that be? It doesn't mean that you'll come back and you'll take anything from my house. I could have taken your computer. You might take my telephone, I don't know. Or you might take my television, they'll come back and they'll take something from society. They'll take another person. It doesn't mean they'll go for you. Illness, you might have done the harm as an individual. But illness will come and affect anybody in society. The group will have to pay. So then you have to reestablish this, give back the energy, clean it, and keep the flow going. It's like in acupuncture, where the energy accumulates, that's where you get illness. So keep the energy flowing. And that's why you do diet, that's why you keep clean. And the shaman, because he handles the energy, he's powerful. He has a powerful energy, he's learned the techniques, he can clean this energy. But we are part of nature. The vital energy flows all the way through nature all the time. And it manifests itself a lot in these sacred sites, in these places, which are sort of the sacred points, sacred sites.
Are these energy centers?
Yes, the energy centers, or you can also talk about in India, they use the word, okay.
Well,
the key places, the energy centers of the body.
Yeah, and it also reminds me, everything that you're speaking about right now, reminds me so much of the studies of Ayurvedic in India. Mm-hmm. They all talk about energies and your type of dosha, and there's just great similarity here. I think that, this was, Ayurvedic, I think was maybe done 5,000 years ago or whatever, yeah. and it's written in Sanskrit, so it's a lost language, but it really does talk about like each individual and the food that each individual eats within the collective bunch, and how do you take a more proactive, preventative measures to keep your
Absolutely.
body in balance and clean, versus if you think just in our Western society, we're more reactive.
Yeah.
We don't really have a healthcare system,
Yeah.
per se. This belief that stems from many of these different cultures is, for me, a more proactive and preventative one, and is one of the biggest differences. And again, it's just kind of a behavioral shift. I think it's really beautiful.
No, definitely. They call, let's say, with the Tanimukas, they'll use the word fufaka to talk about energy, or the Macunas would call it ketioka. And there is fufaka and there's ketioka in everything, in the plants and the animals. They all have the fufaka and the ketioka. But the shamans develop it much more and control this. No? And you keep this energy clean. And when the energies overlap, when you have this, which the Tanimukas will call neneshike, which is it's not a good translation, but you could call it also contamination. That is that you have an overlap of energies. You have to keep this clean. So when you have seasons, it happens the same thing. In each season in the world, in the environment that you live, is dominated by a particular plant. Let's say you might have the seasons of pineapple, or you might have the season of certain palm trees, or you might have the seasons of whatever it is. And during that period of, let's say, 20 days, 3 weeks, depends on the plants, that is this period that is dominated by that particular plant. That is the energy that's in the air or nature, or is dominating. So every time you have this change from one season to another, you hold a ritual, and in the ritual the shaman picks up this energy, and with the ritual and the singers, who then take the yahe, that of diverted from the yahe question, or from the ayahuasca question. In certain tribes they take it, and others they don't take it. They just take coke and tobacco. But they dance for 2 days and 2 nights. And as they sing, the music goes up in a spiral and takes all the energy back to the guardian spirits, because there are guardian spirits above us. And the energy comes down with the beams of the sun, and is carried from different levels, where you have the different energies in this world that then come to our world. The different energies that come to our world, you have to give them back, clean the season for the next season to come in. Return the energy of that season for the next season to come in. And there you have a ritual for about 2 days and 2 nights, as I said, but you'll probably keep a diet for 3 days or 4 days. And each time, and then at the end, the shaman will say, now the next season is fundamentally like this to behavior. I mean, he'll clarify it again. And of course, we'll clarify for each individual also, particularly those individuals that are more vulnerable at that stage for different reasons. He doesn't have to go to each individual, but the more vulnerable ones, he will speak directly, and the rest he'll give a general understanding or guide for the next season. So each season you clean. If you don't clean from moving from one season to another, you'll get an overlap of the energies of one and the other, and you'll have illness coming in again. So the ayahuasca that you're asking me works in this world of meditation, of preparing, of flowing, of being in contact with nature, and of when you go into rituals and they take the ayahuasca, as I repeat, all of them do, depending on different ethnic groups. They'll only take it in the ritual. They won't take it outside the ritual. And what they do is that they say they become their ancestors again. Basically what they do is they go deep in themselves, and they connect with the energies of life. They connect with the flow. And the shaman is there always directing. You always have a director for those, because not only the shaman takes it, everybody, all the men take it, the women don't, and they connect. But women don't have to take it. Women don't get this because women are nature. Women are much closer to nature. Women are creation in itself. Women really are the beginning of everything, the mother of everything. When you ask them what is health, they say health is women. Health are the one that the women bring up children, the women give birth, the women produce food. Women are health. Women are nature. Men keep order. But it's the women that are the creation in nature. Men simply try and keep this energy balanced so it doesn't accumulate. That's the responsibility of men, to keep the order. But the women are nature in itself. So women don't have to take yahe, women don't have to tune into that, women are that already. So in the ritual, the men take the yahe and they go deep in themselves. And it's not just the yahe, it's the songs for 2 days and 2 nights, the chanting, because they're not songs, they chant for 2 days and 2 nights, and they transcend. They transcend into themselves, not out of themselves. And they feel a deep connection with nature, and this is the way to give back the energy. Then they go into diet, then you have to vomit, you have to clean your body from the yahe, and then, although they vomit, in more traditional groups, they vomit every day. They drink water and vomit just to keep cleaning their stomach all the time and to keep up this habit. And then when they take yahe, you throw it up and throw it out. And you go on a diet, and sometimes they can put a diet and say you can't eat pork, never. And they say danta or tapers or things like that. I might say for a year or 2 years. I mean, the diets can go on for a long time. Mm-hmm. And also, specifically, you can't eat fish or animals at certain times when they are very fat and there's a lot of grease. And grease, again, is bad. Salt is bad for you because it slows down the flow of energy in your body, among other things. So they'll put you on certain diets, again, depending on the person. And they eat very little anyway, compared to us. Mm. And of course, they're chewing their coca all the time, the men. And that has a very strong nutrient. The women eat more than the men, not because they eat in the house, at home, or in the house. In the longhouse, you eat little, but they're in the garden and they pick and eat here, and they have fruits and they have different things where they can eat all the time. And so a good-looking woman, a healthy woman, an attractive woman is a woman that is strong and fat, a good-sized woman, and strong, and that is a beautiful woman. As I say, a woman with fat legs, that's an attractive woman.
I would be very attractive there. I have very big legs. The rest of me, not so attractive. Yes. Were you encouraged to actually partake in many of these rituals? And if so, did you feel like you achieved going into yourself, or did you even like the rituals?
At the beginning, I was very interested in the rituals, and I went to many. And then I had to keep on going to them, and sometimes I say, oh God, not again. Another 2 nights, and taking coca and going around a circle and getting half stoned. And I wasn't that keen on it after some time. But then I went to rituals, and once I was there, but it was great. But you can't sleep for 2 days and 2 nights, or a bit more. And it's quite tough going. The key thing in a ritual is dance, as I chant. If you sit down, it's tough going because then you have to keep awake. And then it's also fun because you sit down and they also get tired and they're falling asleep and sometimes they don't want to dance. So they come over to you and they sit beside you and they say, I'm going to tell you a story. And the key thing there is that at the moment they sit down, you tell them, I'm going to tell you a story. Whoever says first, I'm going to tell you a story, tells the story. And if you're tired and have to listen to a story, it's a killer. Because it goes on for hours, the damn story. Whereas if you can tell the story first, then you can knock the other person out with your long story and he falls asleep. So you always have to have a story in mind. If someone's going to sit beside you in a ritual, be ready to say, I'll tell you a story.
And then you better get up on your feet really quickly so you don't...
I'll tell you a short one. No, but if you're caught by somebody and tells you a long story, you've had it.
This is something that you've learned, I have a feeling.
Definitely. And there you have to be very careful because they have a long story. And in their culture, you cannot interrupt. You cannot ask them to make the story short. You just have to listen there quietly until he finishes his story. And the same goes when you sit in a circle at night and you chew coca and you start talking at night. There's a head man there, or the main man in the longhouse. And until he says, we're going to rest now, nobody can stand up from the circle. And if it goes through all night, you sit there all night. And if you're uncomfortable, tough luck. You just sit there and you listen through. You don't stand up and say, I'm tired. They can keep you up all night. Or up is a way. They'll keep you sitting on that low bench all night. And you don't interrupt. You don't ask questions. When you sit with them, you say what you think. For instance, if I wanted to talk, let's say, about politics in the United States or about Obama, just to give an example, I'll sit down here with you and I say, well, I've been thinking about Obama and I've been thinking this and this and this and this. And then you'll answer. But I would not come up and say, what do you think about Obama? Because that's rude. Because I'm putting you up against the wall and you don't know what I think, and I might be in favor or against his decisions and you don't know what I think. And it wouldn't be polite that you come out and say, well, I think he's pretty weak and I'm feeling the contrary, and then we get into discussion on it. No. I say what I think, and on the basis of what I say what I think, you will also say what you think, and you'll find a nice way of saying what you think. Even if you disagree with me, you wouldn't say, in their tradition, I disagree with you. I don't think what you're saying is true. You never use that word, true. You would say, that's the way you think, that suits you. I'm different, I think in a different way. But you would not confront the other person. You say, oh, that's the way you think, okay. I'm someone else. I have that way of thinking. And you say, and then you can explain why you think in a different way. But you don't confront. And same goes for stories. When somebody starts a story, and you don't ask questions again, because perhaps being an outsider, you could ask for a clarification. But basically, if you're telling me your story, and you're talking about yourself, or about the way you think, and about who you live, or whatever you have, it's a bit rude for me to ask, to try and dig deeper in you. Because you're saying as much as you want to say, and I have to understand that that's as far as you want to go. And it wouldn't be polite on my side to start digging and say, but why do you say that? What do you mean? Or where are you going with that? And perhaps you don't want to say that. Perhaps you don't want to go any deeper. That's as far as you want to go. So questions, you don't ask questions in that sense. You can ask a question, an obvious question. Did you see where somebody left a knife? I mean, something like that. Obviously, these kind of silly questions or basic questions. And you can ask a question, of course, tell me a story about this, or tell me about this, or why do those birds behave like that? And then it could go into a story, right? It goes both ways. You don't ask questions, but at the same time, if you don't ask a question, they won't tell you anything. So you don't ask a question of digging in, but you will ask a question of how the animals behave. If, I'm giving an example of how animals behave, or whatever it is, but if I don't ask a question, you will not start telling me about those birds, or about the animals, or about how you're cooking, or you won't tell me things unless I ask a question, because for them it means I'm not prepared to listen. I have to show I'm prepared to listen for you to tell me something. But once you tell me something, I don't try and dig deeper, because you're telling me as much as you consider that you want to say, or that I should know. Because knowledge, again, is something that's dangerous. They question, in a way, or they are surprised that in the Western world, we are willing to put our knowledge in books that anybody can read. For them, knowledge is power. And unless you are properly educated, and unless you have the proper formation, you should not have access to certain information. Perhaps in our world, the closest, or one of the closest we can come to, is in medicine. If you're not a doctor, if you're not trained, you should not have knowledge to certain medicine, because you might misuse it. That will go in shamanism a lot, and that will go in their world. If you're not properly trained, you don't have the formation to handle information, they won't give you the information. And they are surprised that in the Western world you can go and buy a book on practically anything, and you don't have the sense of responsibility, you don't have the training, you don't have the discipline to handle this knowledge.
You can misuse the knowledge. You could go and figure out how to make a bomb online, but if you don't have the psychological training, you could really abuse or misuse that power, and all knowledge could be viewed that way.
So they're very aware of that.
Yeah.
So they'll tell you a story to a certain point, they'll give you an understanding to a certain point, but they won't. You can't go in and tell somebody, teach me shamanism or something like that. It doesn't work like that.
Well, did you ever feel at some point that you're north, or you felt that you needed a guide or some advice? And did you ever at any point in time go to one of the Indigenous leaders that you work with and ask for advice, or have you never kind of approached it in that way?
I think I felt lost most of the time. But and we would sit there as is normal at night and talk about things. And obviously, as an anthropologist, especially at the beginning, when I was doing my thesis, obviously I asked questions and I got guidance from that perspective, from understanding their culture, and obviously we discussed their culture. From a personal point of view of my own feelings of how to handle things in my own personal life, no. We can talk about things, yes. I haven't felt it that much, because it's not the way things work with them, in my understanding. I can ask them, what do you think about this? What do you think about a general case of whatever it happens to be? I wouldn't ask my personal things, but I could ask something that I am living, how do they think about a situation, not necessarily referring to myself. And they would know what I'm talking about. But in general, they expect you that by observing life, by observing nature, and by listening to stories, you find your own answers. Even with children, when children ask an elder, he'll tell a story. And there might be several children there, and he's telling a story. And the children will find their answer through the story. But he does not tell them individually, you think this or this is the answer. You find the answers. In the same way, you don't say, go and they don't guide you in that sense. That, again, is my interpretation and the way I have felt it as I've lived with them. But more that through stories and through situations and through discussions, I discover and I find my own way around. They will say, or one could go and say, look, I want you to clean my energy. That kind of thing, yes. They would come to me and say, Martin, I don't know if the right word is heal you, but I want to clean you and give you energy so you can do good hunting. And mainly my hunting is to go out and get money. And they're interested that I be successful. So I can keep on supporting several projects with them. So they say, we're going to prepare you. And they call me over and say, Martin, now we're going to really put energy into you so things will go well.
Do they bring 3 or 4 shamans?
Exactly.
Little backup.
I had an amusing experience, and of course it's my interpretation. I don't know. There was this guy, a shaman, that had sent me word with his son that he wanted me to go because he wanted to heal me. He had done it 10 years ago. I don't remember if he did it, but he said he did okay. And he sent a message and he says, time that you come again so you can keep up the good hunting. 2 years went by, I didn't go, but after the third year, second year, I went down there and I came and he said, here you come, nice to see you, man. What brings you here? And I said, you said you wanted to heal me. He burst out laughing. He said, well, I can do that in a second. I mean, that's no problem. And we got into long stories of how all this happened and how I came into the forest and how things have evolved. And he was very pleased talking about these things because obviously he was getting information or hearing stories that came from me and not, it's the same story coming from different actors or from different people. And then at the end, they have this red powder, karayuru, which they put this energy in, and then you put it on your belly button and on your mouth, and then people will agree with you when you suggest ideas and things like that, or suggest what are you doing when you're going hunting. And I said, thank you. He wrapped it up in a piece of silver paper from a cigarette package and gave it to me. I put it in my pocket, and some time later, I opened it, and there was nothing. It was empty. And I interpreted, I don't know what it meant, that he was saying, look, you don't need it. You don't need this extra red power, no? Of course, I interpreted it in that way and not saying he fooled me. Of course, I wasn't paying him. I wasn't giving anything. But anyway, I guess the idea came from because I saw years ago this Panda Kung Fu or Kung Fu Panda. One of these.
Kung Fu Panda, yeah.
And at the end, he opens and there's nothing. More or less saying, look, you've got it. You don't have to go on. You don't have to look for things.
Well, that's a funny thing
It's
because
in you.
you said you've interpreted it in such a way. Yet if you had ever seen him again, would you have inquired about
No.
is this the way that I would see? And that's an
Never.
interesting thing to me because, the first time that I had gone to Colombia, I was actually prepared and kind of thinking of contemplating at least of doing ayahuasca. And then if I shall recount, you sent me an email. If you're set in wanting to do it, then feel free to do it. But I think given your nature or your composition, that it's something that you actually don't need. And I really sat with that and I was like, oh man, it felt like very sage advice. And I wasn't quite sure why, but it felt as if you had peered into a piece of my soul and told me something that I probably already knew, but you served it up very directly. And then, I saw you, of course, this week, and I'm just like, well, why did you? There was this part where I'm like, I really want to understand where it came from.
Again, it's me and my way of seeing things. I think that you have, I don't think it's healthy for you. I think you have it already in you. I think you are somebody that spent your life very much in contact with nature. You have been careful about that. You have tuned into energies, and you have to trust yourself that you're going in the right path, and you're doing it. And I think that taking ayahuasca, if it were that you went to a tribe where I have been, and because then when you take ayahuasca, or you take yaqui, where I have been, and I sit in a ritual, I cannot say, I'm not asking for it. I cannot say no. It's the yaqui has chosen me to manifest itself through me, which God knows nothing happen, or something might not happen, or I might just see something that I don't find particularly interesting or important, or I certainly am not going deep in myself necessarily, or I might. I don't know what's happening really. But the ayahuasca decided, according to the shaman, the ayahuasca said, and we might be 50 people there or 30 people there with the Indians. I might be the only white person. Or when I went there with Wade also. And we were 3 of us there. And they came and they offered it to me. We had just come from a long trip. I was a bit tired. And they said, Martin, ayahuasca has chosen you, but didn't choose the Indian beside me or the other Indians or Wade, me. I don't feel it as an honor. I don't feel it as anything. It's just that, or as a victim. No, it was me. That was it. So I just had to take it, and then you become rather dumb, and then you vomit. It's not that much fun, really. And then you might see things, or you mightn't, or you might see things that you like or dislike. Anyway. But I think that if you're there and ayahuasca chooses you, you accept it. There's no way. That's the way it is. But you don't go out looking for it. And I think that you have to absolutely trust your own criteria, trust your own being, trust your own essence. And you're already very close to it. You live in this world. Trust yourself. And so I wouldn't do it. But again, that's the way I think. You might find other people say, no, it's my great experience. I want to go down there. And I've had such marvelous experiences that I think is terribly important for me. Fair enough. I know what it does for them. But if it helps them, and I don't know, I'm certainly in no position at all to question what these shamans that come and sell there or promote their ayahuasca in New York or wherever it is, I'm in no position to say that they're right or wrong or to criticize them or question them. They're doing what they're doing and the people get involved. But if somebody asks me, like your case, I'll say what I think.
Well, I never really enjoyed vomiting either, so I think I might pass. Just to kind of wrap this up, I think one of the things that we haven't really talked about is that you traveling through Colombia and through the Amazon back in the 1970s and now working very diligently through and with the Indigenous people there, you all have successfully been able to really allowing Indigenous people to have their rightful way of living and have achieved around 50%, is it, of the Amazon rainforest is now recognized by the government as
55%.
55%
is as their property.
Recognized as their property,
Collective
which is a huge undertaking. I think that this really is a model for other countries and other Indigenous people around the world who are looking to be recognized as this is their collective ownership. And I want to really stress it out to all the listeners out there, what, an achievement this is, and knowing that, this is just part of an achievement. So 55%. And there's in how much percentages as well as is in more reserves or conservation areas?
In conservation and parks, another 17%.
Okay, 17%.
But there's some overlapping, so we're about up to 63, 60 something, 65%.
And that's an area the size of what?
That's the area, it's nearly the size, the whole area is not quite the size of France, but nearly the size of France. The area that we have managed to get as indigenous territories is bigger than the United Kingdom. The still United Kingdom, that is Scotland, England, and Wales and Northern Ireland.
It's just so, it brings a massive smile to my face. We had you speaking up in Connecticut, and I know you don't get a chance to speak to many public groups, but some of the impression of people in the audience, and I was in the audience, was just like, I can't believe this exists, because not many people know this story. And you said, yes, it's only been 40 years. And you kind of casually say, there's a time and a place for everything. If I existed 100 years ago, this might have not existed, but it's happening now. And it is happening now, and we're becoming much more aware of these stories, of your story, of all these group stories. What's on the agenda for the next year? What's your vision for the next year? I mean, I know that you're focusing on strengthening education in the way that each of these Indigenous groups want to see education, health as they would want to see it, and be recognized from the government. But you have a vision of taking a look across the borders of Colombia and into other Indigenous groups across Peru, Brazil, Bolivia. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I think there are 4 major topics I'm interested in right now. One is to consolidate in these territories that Indigenous people have now, the local government. Because as we manage to get the national government to decentralize, and as they set up their own intercultural programs, administrating the funds, setting up projects, being accountable to their people, achieving participation is something that takes time to learn. It's not that easy. So we have all the elements, but still to do it properly for them, which come from another culture, it's not that easy, and it takes a bit of time. So that's one major thing, accompanying them in the process of proper administration and managing funds and projects. I would say the second important thing is that things have changed in Colombia. The Amazon used to be the backyard of the country, and now it is not the backyard anymore. There's more interest in the government of the whole Amazon. The Amazon is becoming very important with climate change, but it's also becoming very important because there are minerals, so there's mining that puts pressure there. So although we spent now 25 years working mostly in the field, not exclusively, but mostly in the field, we have to give more importance, without abandoning the field, we have to give more importance in the capital, in the city, of advocacy and following up on laws and policies, on lobbying and having a certain impact to try and get the decision makers to understand the importance of the Amazon and make the decisions of preserving and respecting biodiversity and cultural diversity, and not going in with conventional development, which would destroy the forest. The third one is that the big topic right now in Colombia is the peace process, which they're discussing in the Habana, Cuba, with the FARC, the guerrilla. And it could well be signed next year, some stage, an agreement. And then they would sort of be reinserted into the society, and they would be settling at the foothills of the Andes, at the headwaters of the Amazon rivers. And there is looking into that, how this will relate to the forest and how it will relate to the Indigenous people. And that's something I'm also very interested, because it is very important what's going to happen, what laws are going to be put forward, how these laws are going to work, how they're going to settle there, and what meaning will that have for the Amazon. And then the other point that you asked, which is the transboundary one, there we have 2. We have one project that's already working in the Northwest Amazon, covering about 70 million hectares. That is, we have an agreement that from the Indigenous people to civil society, NGOs, to the governments on both sides, Brazil and Colombia, to safeguard the immaterial culture. And that is a UNESCO agreement. And there we're working on sacred sites, we're working on this mapping, we're working on the calendars and rituals on both sides. We're working means that we accompany a process. The Indigenous people are working on it and doing their research and exchanging experience from one side of the border to the other, Brazil and Colombia, and the government is picking up this as a general policy, which is extremely important for us, because I think that the most important thing in all this is the political will and turning all these initiatives into public policies and laws that will make them more sustainable. The best we can do, but is to get the governments to sign. And the other point that we are pushing now with our colleagues in Brazil is that there is a lot of parks and indigenous territories already that make a corridor, and about 80% of a corridor going from the Andes right across to the Atlantic Ocean, north of the Amazon River. And of course, we can also get Venezuela and the Guianas involved, but at the moment it's just Brazil and Colombia to start, just with a small group working on it. But the corridor is 80%. It's not that difficult, I think. It will have us, but it's not that complicated. We've come a long way. The laws are there. We know how to work on it. We need the political will. And I think we can get the political will from the Colombian government, and we have to get it from the Brazilian government. already exists. We've come a long way, and I think we have to achieve it, particularly in the light of climate change and of the importance of the Amazon and biodiversity and the traditional knowledge of these people, that I don't think we can protect the Amazon without the indigenous people. Certainly not the case of Colombia, and I think the rest of it, because if we want to protect it, of course, if we don't want to protect it and we want to cut it down, well, we have no use for indigenous knowledge. But if we want to protect it, there is no way that we can set up 200, 500, 1,000 forest guards, train them and help them down there. But the communities are already there. They have the knowledge. They have traditional knowledge. They're organized. We just have to support them with what they need to run their own territories, and they will fulfill the role. It is not the reason of existence to fulfill the role as forest guards, but certainly because of their cosmology and the way they live with the forest, they're not going to cut it down. But they do need support from the government. If they're left on their own, and sometimes they have needs, like everybody has needs, they're not poor, but they have needs. They have to access things from the Western world, or Western medicine to an extent, bush knives, hammocks, many things, motors. If the government is not willing to give them a hand, we will always find companies and other people, legal or illegal, willing to give them a hand, and then that knowledge will turn against us instead of being in favor of us. Now, all the indigenous people would pick that up, but many young people will say, look, I have a living and I want to have access to things. So the indigenous people are the natural allies to the whole environmental movement and to all protection of the rainforest. But we have to understand they're allies, and allies means reciprocity. They'll take care of the forest, but we also have to support them. And that, I think, is essential, and we haven't understood it. I think we have to go beyond indigenous people's rights, meaning that they are the bottom line, which we have to keep there. There's no doubt about that. That is the bottom line. But we have to understand that there are cultures, there are people we can sit down at the table, that we can negotiate. They have something that we need and they can offer us, like taking care of the forest and their traditional knowledge. We have something they need, which is supporting them in many things that the West is useful and is important for them. So we must have a reciprocity and exchange, and mutually protect the rainforest and build into the future, and not see them as primitive or as somebody that wants to be like us or have a paternalistic approach. No, we have to sit at the table. We both need each other, and we both should build the future together, protecting the rainforest, particularly now in climate change.
Martijn van Hildebrand, we have reached our end, and I could talk to you for forever and hear you talk forever. The work that you do is vital, and the work that you're doing with all the indigenous groups and the people that work on your team is absolutely vital. I do believe that we will have the political will, because when you showed me the vision for the future, it got me excited, and I'm sure it'll get other people excited as well. So people can find out a bit more about you on GaiaAmazonas.org, also on social media at Gaia Amazonas, and it is my knowledge that you're establishing a 501c3 nonprofit here in the United States, which is great because it'll allow more people to be able to give and contribute to your cause directly. So thank you so much for letting me come into your surrogate house here and doing the interview with you.
And that's all. Thank you, Summer. Thank you for this interview, and thank you for all of you that are listening to this.